Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and we spill the tea. This is the show, Morgan, that you do every week. Do you hear the sound of my voice? Do you know who's talking right now?
Yes.
Yeah, this is actually an intervention.
You're disgusting.
This is the welcome to the 70th episode of Jams and Tea, incidentally.
Whew.
So we're racking up the milestones. we're gonna be at 100 before we know it. I can tell it.
We can now be a part of AARP. It's great.
Okay. I mean, that's one way of thinking about it. Yes, Jake, why don't you tell our viewers what we're going to be reviewing today?
This week we are going to be reviewing the new album from Adele, 30, and we're also going to be reviewing the collaborative record between Converge and Chelsea Wolfe. We're going to be talking about Blood Moon, motherfucker, and
Blood Moon 1.
Oh, Blood Moon 1, implying that there could be a Blood Moon 2. Oh my God. We're also going to be talking about on this week's Record Club, it is Tyler's recommended album, which is Yo La Tengo's I Can Hear the Heart Beating is One. That's a biggin'. So stay tuned for that. And this week on the channel, as you have no doubt probably already seen, judging by the view count, but just in case you haven't, we have put up, and by we I mean Zach and Tyler, have put up a monolithic 5 hours, biggest video on this channel since the Twilight Sad breakdown, aptly named breakdown. They break down the discography of Animal Collective. 5 hours long. I watched all of it last night, and it's a fantastic fucking video. They break down every entry in this discography with a fine-toothed comb, not just mainline entries, but solo projects from people in the band like Panda Bear, etc., etc. So if you're like one of those people who really is into something like Sleep Cycle, then boy howdy, they've got you covered.
Look at you, Jake. You've been fucking educated. You know the names, you know the albums and shit.
Yeah.
Look at you go. Yeah, very proud of that video. Zach and I spent 2 weeks of our life essentially like losing our minds preparing for it. And then this week, as I'll mention, because I have no spoiler alert, I have absolutely zero what we've been listening to segment this week, because literally my entire week has been recording this video, editing this video, and hyping up this video to the point where it feels like I put more effort into this video than like my honors dissertation. So I'm glad that people
it's paying off, because it's gonna hit 200 views before the 2-day mark. So
yeah, I mean, by the time this video goes up, it might even be even higher. Who knows? Yeah, but anyway, if the point I want to raise, even though that is a 5 hour video, and when you watch it / if you want to watch it, you'll see why it had to be. It's still a video that we've designed to be kind of friendly to people who are sort of new to the group, as Jake can attest. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't got into Animal Collective and you're curious, we talk about the appeal of the band before we even get into their records, and they have so many different albums that sound so unique from each other as well. So it might be a matter of finding which flavor of Animal Collective is your flavor. But once you do, I think you'll discover why they're certainly one of the most culturally important bands of the last 20 years, whether you like them or not. But even despite that, one of the most interesting and fascinating and purely original bands as well. Like, there's no one who did what they did. And as Zach says in the video, their influence is so far and wide that you can compare two bands that have been clearly influenced by them, and those two bands might sound absolutely unalike completely. So that speaks to the versatility of this band, and we're really excited for their new album, Time Skiffs, which is coming out in February, which Zach will be rejoining us to review when that's released as well. So yeah, really excited about that. And Zach and I are already talking in our DMs about the potential next project that we may work on, which I will keep under wraps for now.
Ain't no rest for the autistic.
That's true. I mean,
that's never stops.
This is how I cope.
We also put up a very lengthy video on Porcupine Tree's Light Bulb Sun very recently. Go check that out if you haven't. Our Porcupine Tree videos seem to be of great interest to many people. Yeah, so please, underrated album, go check that one out. And beforehand, I would just like to say, Those Who Dwell in the Dark is now available on hardback.
Hell
So,
yes.
you know, if you're doing some Cyber Monday shopping, maybe
Go and buy
get
one of
somebody.
those and use it to beat a homophobe to death.
Yes, that's the energy that I like to see here.
Yes.
Please just beat them with all of the gay horror novels.
Yeah. I love the idea of someone who's like, I don't know, not supportive of the gay, picking that book up and getting through like the first few chapters and being like, this is quite a cool story, and then like suddenly having been blindsided by the subtle and then very not subtle eventually intrusion of the queerness. It brings me a great joy to imagine that. Anyway,
someone who is not in support of the gay.
Anyway,
Tyler Atkinson.
the reading Those Who Dwell in the Dark to realizing you're a lesbian pipeline.
That I mean, if you go watch the video with Luke, that basically happened.
Yeah. Anyway, let's get into the first segment of our episode, as we do every week, where we talk about what we have been listening to for the last 7 days. Jake, what have you been listening to?
I have decided to become a Pitchfork reader / MU user in the year 2013 this week, because I have, I have mostly been listening to Animal Collective, Björk, and the Beatles. The Beatles I'll start out with because there has been just a lot of people talking about the Beatles recently. Like, thank you, Mike the Snare, I guess.
Shout out Peter Jackson.
Yeah, I think it's the Peter Jackson.
Oh, yeah, that too. That's probably why. You can't see it, but I have a Beatles poster that's behind a bookshelf. But I am a big Beatles fan, and I just haven't listened to their music in a while, just because, I mean, I know all of it. I've listened to all of it so much in my life. But because of Mr. Mike the Snare's video, which you should definitely watch, I actually discovered something interesting in that the versions of the Beatles albums I've been listening to all these years have sucked, because they are the 2009 stereo remasters, which I went back and listened to see what he was talking about, to see if the panning was as bad as he said it was. And holy fucking shit, it was as bad as he said it was. Why the fuck are those albums fucking, why did they do that? Why? So I made an effort to go and download the 2009 mono mixes instead, and the Sgt. Pepper's mix that's just like the most recent, like I think like 2016 remaster or whatever the fuck it is. But I listened to a couple canon Beatles albums, including Sgt. Pepper's and Revolver. I'll keep my thoughts on Revolver quiet, just because I know we have plans to cover that album in the coming year, and a very special
video we do too. We have it. I'm really excited for that video.
Yeah, but that's, you know, canon Beatles album. But Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, big important album for music, very lauded record, and you know, definitely top tier Beatles for me. That said, I think I came to the discovery of, while I am definitely a Beatles fan, I don't really think that they're an album band. I don't really particularly think any of their albums, like many of them, granted, really hold up under scrutiny, honestly. And I say that as somebody who has a deep attachment to a lot of these songs. And I think that there's an attempt with albums. Like, I think that Revolver is a pretty holistic album. And there's definitely, even though I don't like it as much as most people, I think Abbey Road is definitely like holds up under the scrutiny of at least like structure. But with stuff like Sgt. Pepper's, it's like you just sort of go back and listen to this, and it's just kind of like, I can really understand why people would be underwhelmed by this, just because like there's lots of like great classic songs on there that are undeniably amazing. And then there are also songs that's just like, you know, when's the last time you heard somebody talk about For Rita, a great song, but you know what I mean. But like, when you look at the totality of it, and you realize that like why it was important for like rock music, and what makes it different, and what makes it cool, and what makes it this really big opulent step for them as artists and musicians, you know, once you do take that away, and that is, albeit a very, very big thing, the album is just kind of a very good album. I mean, like there's nothing that's really like cohesive or mind-blowing about it. And the only reason that I hold it to that standard is because there are plenty of albums from that time period that hold up under that level of scrutiny. I think that maybe because the Beatles came from the area of music that they did as, rock and, pop musicians, is that they were sort of like, it was really more of an important movement for pop music and popular rock music as a whole than it is to be evaluated in its own kind of singular context. I won't get like too heady or anything about it. It's definitely like a great album in many respects, but like I'm definitely not going to be one of the people who's going to argue and say it's like one of the best of all time, just because I feel like you need so much peripheral information and context to properly consider it as such. So maybe that's an uncool opinion to have, but I still love the record. I still love the Beatles, and I still love their music. So
my only,
fuck you.
addendum to the like Beatles album band debate, I guess, is I guess I kind of see where you're coming from. What I think is interesting about the Beatles' late career is like, and what I think really resonates is the ways in which they kind of experimented with form in terms of like presenting their music, like albums like Abbey Road and the White Album, and even like Magical Mystery Tour and whatever. Like those are albums where like the structure of those records is unconventional for the time. It's in subtle ways and sometimes in very not subtle ways. And I think it lends itself to like the albums can feel unwieldy and not conventionally well structured. And that's kind of part of what's so important and influential about them, is how they kind of like, broke so many different rules and really opened the gate for so many different bands. I mean, for the most part, those structural choices I do like them, and I do think the Beatles are an important album band, but I do think also that the other side of that coin is that their unconventionality, their like playing with format, creates a later half of the discography in particular where it's just not gonna resonate as album experiences with every single person, because it is by definition and by intention, unconventional and strange. And, I mean, with the White Album, for instance, like actively, challenging and almost like refuting the notion of like what a good album should be, like what the idea of like, careful structure and like flow and all that sort of thing. Like it's complete refutation of that. And yeah, I think I see why there's like a variation in the extent to which people are able to get on board with that. And I mean, even myself, like I've been up and down on the White Album over the years. But yeah, it's just like difficult to sort of evaluate those records in the same way as like other records from that time, like by bands like the Rolling Stones or the Beach Boys or whatever. The Beatles are like, their whole approach is just fundamentally different. And that makes them so interesting.
The only thing I would counter that is say that like in a lot of the ways that they are structurally unconventional is that I don't think that unconventionalness really like does anything other than be unconventional. Like to me, it's like when they do this, it's just like, yeah, it is. It doesn't change the feeling in me. It doesn't change the emotional response that I have. It doesn't change like the way I think about the music. Like there's certainly albums of theirs that like Rubber Soul and Revolver that I think hold up in the same way that like a Beach Boys album would. But I'm not trying to dwell on it or anything, but to me, it's like they definitely like broke a lot of boundaries and did a lot of important things. But I also think that it's like it was such the ways in which they defied convention were in and of itself in their infancy, and they didn't quite fully realize it, maybe not even until like late career, even in their solo careers, fully understand or fulfill the potential of what they set up in doing things like that. So well, I'm sure we can have an interesting discussion about that when we actually cover Pet Sound
absolutely.
And Revolver. I also am continuing to I'm really properly getting into Björk now. Like I was always a fan of hers and like I really liked specific albums from her, but now I find myself really truly connecting and wholeheartedly adoring her music. And I have been listening to the albums that I already talked about, but I've ventured into finally re-listening to, for the first time since I got into music, I re-listened to Vespertine. which is an album that I really, really liked back then. And now that I'm more musically storied, I am proud to announce that I like get it with that album, and I understand why that record is viewed as being like the totemic achievement that it is, because I fucking agree. It's oh my fucking god, what an album. I just like, that was a transformative experience for me. I just like, from the first track, like I did not expect to be as completely blown away as I was. I was just like, this, like, not only has this album not aged a single day, this is just like, this album just sounds better than like everything I've heard since. Like, how did she do that? And just like the way that that album is mixed, and that like her breathing in between words is compressed to be as loud as the singing itself, is like, it's a weird choice, but it becomes this like intimate, intergalactic, sparkling, icy thing that just it feels right. I like the landscapes that album like creates. Like, that's when I enjoy Björk the most, I think, is when she is like fully focused on diving into a complete like world and designing something as like almost a soundscape. It's why I like Utopia as much as I do, because I think it's a very similar approach, and those things are sort of born from the same the genesis of her doing Vespertine is her relationship with Matthew Barney, and then that sort of like the fallout of that can be felt on an album like Volnicura, which I do need to go back to, but I love that album, but I do need to revisit it. But it's also then revisited again on something like Utopia, where it's like recontextualized, and I love that particular approach more than anything. I also went back and re-listened to Medulla, which I love just as much as I always have. I think that's just a terrific record that is like weird and just absolutely fucking alien, and I love it. And Homogenic, which is a very great album. And yeah, I mean, just fucking Björk good, right? Hot take. And rounding out my MU listening, of course, Tyler and Zach have been talking about Animal Collective all week, and I listened to the video last night, but I wanted to sort of prepare myself for the video and sort of acclimate myself, because I'd only heard Merryweather Post Pavilion before. And that's still an album I really like. I listened to it again. It's still great for all the reasons that you all said it was. It's just an immaculate sounding album. It's a really immediate album. It's terrific. I mean, just a really, really easily enjoyable album. But the album that I want to talk about is the album that Tyler and Zach talked about the most, which is Feels, which you all both went on record saying is your favorite Animal Collective album. And it's an album that I love too. But at the same time, I feel like I'm also very much still in the process of understanding Animal Collective and understanding this album. So it's not something that I even fully understand yet, just because it is such a dense album, which is weird, just because it is like one of the more like, again, it doesn't feel appropriate to describe it this way, but it is kind of more ambiently focused, but it's so energetic and so dense that it's not like, an ambient album. But the approach to the sound, I feel like in songs like Daffy Duck, for instance, that's the sort of thing that they're going for. And I think the thing that is really going to help unlock the band even further for me is really the emphasis you all had on the songwriting, which I won't lie, I didn't really pay all that much attention to in listening to the Animal Collective albums that I've listened to so far, just because I kind of figured that, like, with music like this, I kind of figured that it would be more along the lines of, Wallpaper. But like, the more you all talked about it and the more that I listened to Feels, the more I was just like, yeah, no, there's something here that I was definitely missing before that's vital to the experience of this band. So like, I'm going to take your advice, and one night I'm just going to turn off all my lights and I'm going to do nothing. I'm going to get my nice pair of headphones and I'm going to turn on Feels, and I'm sure that's going to be a capital E experience.
I recommend, I heartily recommend doing exactly that, and also taking an edible. Oh yes, Absolutely do that. Well, I'll also say, this obviously goes without saying, and I'm sure you do plan to listen to it, but I hardly recommend Strawberry Jam as well, because it's a very different.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely.
And I think I only bring it up because you mentioned the sort of songwriting thing, and to me, that's the peak of the songwriting in that band, is that record. And and that's the record I'd recommend. Incidentally, August, if you wanted to listen to that band at all and you didn't know what to listen to, that would be the album I'd recommend to you as well. Strawberry Jam is just a very eclectic, very noisy, and very abrasive pop record that has so much emotion and power in it. But you're right, Jake. Your brain has to get used to the way that the people in Animal Collective approach music and sound design. It is just distinctly different and weird and unusual, and the whole approach to song structure and all that sort of stuff is just strange, and it takes some acclimation. But once you get immersed in that world, it's like there's nothing else like it. It becomes so attractive because of its uniqueness. And Feels has this great sound palette because like it's just this sound palette of like guitars and pianos that are all like detuned but made to sound like really
the pianos. Oh god.
Yeah, they're just it's such a I don't want to get into it. Watch the video. It's a gorgeous album. It's beautiful.
Yes. All I will say on that is that like I look forward to further falling in love with that, and the pianos are like whenever they show up on basically anything, that is like the peak of the form of music. Favorite Animal Collective song so far is probably, it's either Grass or The Purple Bottle. Not really sure which, but
two fantastic picks. That album is just stacked front to back. Grass, The Purple Bottle, Banshee Beat, Daffy Duck, Turn Into Something. There's no, absolutely. Go for broke.
Steering away from that a little bit. Yeah, I listened to, just because I mentioned last week we reviewed an album by Aesop Rock, and I was just like, part of it, I was just like, a lot of this just makes me want to go back and listen to the Impossible Kid again. So I went back and listened to the Impossible Kid, and that is just one of the best hip hop albums of the 2010s. And like, I don't like Aesop's got his fans, right? And that album is like decently like it's got like a following, but like I need you to understand, like go listen to the Impossible Kid. It's the perfect sort of meeting of the most accessible parts of Aesop, but also the density of what he's working with too is also like it's really patently like emotional and vulnerable, but also like really heady. There's just not a way that that album does not excel. I'd say that still remains my favorite project from him. I mean, it's got like all of his like catchiest songs, and also like, it's got Kirby on it, which is just a song about him talking about how his therapist told him to get a cat, and it's a song about Kirby fucking in the hamper.
It's so good. I think The Impossible Kid is like it's both the perfect gateway album into like 2010s abstract hip hop, so like non-mainstream commercial hip hop, and it's also like one of the absolute peaks of the form as well for the decade too. Like it manages to be both of those things, which is why it surprised me. Like it's a relatively big and popular and well-loved album, but it surprises me it's not like even more so. Like it is like such a great and accessible and friendly and welcoming, but also really invigorating experience. And he's just at the peak of his game, and both in terms of his rapping and his production as well. Like that's both my favorite Aesop
production
records.
Is faultless.
Yeah,
perfectly produced album.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
my older brother is a funny dude. A lot of funny stuff happened to him. Fucking hooks. Last up here, I will talk about I'm going to talk about an album that has probably seen, like, I know a lot of people really like this album. It's from a band a lot of people talked about, a band that we've talked about at least twice at this point, but I've never been able to enthusiastically talk about them. And that's King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard's Nonagon Infinity. I've been waiting to revisit this album for a while now, just because it's always been like at least vying for my favorite of theirs. It was the album that sort of like got me into them back in like, I think 2016 when it came out. That was like one of the first new albums like I ever really properly listened to. And yeah, it's a masterpiece. I hate that we've only had to talk about them in releases that are like really lukewarm to just kind of disappointing recently. Because they've just been pursuing a sound that I just don't really think they, well, not only that I don't really think that they do an exceptionally like great job at, but a sound that they've already explored. And that's sort of the thing with King Gizzard, it's that they're so hard to pin down. And it's not just because like, oh, on this album they do a synth pop album, and this album they do a fucking thrash metal album. It's like, no, because at the core of their sound, there are still so many different, interesting, unique things that make them awesome. And the thing about Nonagon Infinity is that, like, yeah, it's basically this continuous, completely seamless experience that flows back into itself, and all of these like really good like there's like songwriting and like kind of vague storytelling in it that also feeds into the sort of theme of the interlocking sort of seamlessness of the album, which is really creative and interesting. But the reason that Nonagon Infinity is a fucking amazing album is because it knocks. That album never stops being an absolute fucking blast to listen to. It is just, hey, here is a bunch of garagey, proggy, psychedelic hooks, and it's just nonstop. And it's like, it's a great driving album, but it's also just, it's just something that never ever becomes in danger of tiring for me. It's a blast. It's thoughtful in its construction, and it never sacrifices one for the other. And its sound feels one of a kind and basically perfect at what it's doing. That's just them operating at the peak of their powers. And I can only pray that they make another album that is as attentively constructed as that one, because we deserve another King Gizzard album like that.
Yes. All right. I guess that leaves it to me to talk about what I've been listening to.
Please.
Well, first thing, from Damon Albarn and his band Blur.
Funny, Damon Albarn.
To Park Life.
Oh.
And this is an album that to me feels like it is a prime victim of like that fucking 90s CD bloat, because there are 8 songs on here I absolutely love, and 8 songs on here I could throw out and never listen to again. No, but I do really like plenty of the moments on this. I think tracks like Boys and Girls, Tracy Jacks, End of the Century, Park Life, that opening run is so phenomenally enjoyable, phenomenally entertaining. And later you've got like To the End, London Loves, Clover Over Dover, stuff like that is just great.
This is a love that album.
Yeah, this is a load's good too. But yeah, I'm gonna say as a hot take on this podcast and on this podcast only, I prefer Gorillaz. On the topic of a record club, though, I listened to Yo La Tengo's Electro Pura, a kind of black sheep in this 90s run where they started to become like the coolest band ever. And I think while I generally prefer I Can Hear the Heart as an album to this, I think this has some just brilliant highs. Like Pablo and Andrea and fucking Tom Courtney are just 2 of the band's best songs.
Pablo and Andrea has probably like my favorite, maybe my favorite guitar tone ever.
Oh, it's so good.
It's just like utterly, it melts your fucking heart, and God, I fucking
the
love
way
this band so much.
the way oh my gosh, the way that guitar tone like picks up after every note is
Oh.
so beautiful.
God. And then you have like I'm curious, like I think this album is pretty great from front to back. Like I'm definitely fully in the bag for it. I definitely think that of that run, oh, you know what, I might even rank it over Painful, weirdly enough. I just have it's really grown on me over the years. But there's a lot of really great deep cuts on this record that I really love too, like Hour Grows Late, Ballad of Red Buckets.
Ballad of Red Buckets is nice.
I really like the more minimal moments too, like My Heart's Reflection is just like really eerie and empty in a way that I enjoy. But then you have fucking Blue Line Swinger at the end of that record, and that song is just fucking, it's just like everything. It's like, I don't love it as much as I Heard You Looking in terms of like long guitar based closures on Yo La Tengo albums, but it's like that song times
genre.
10. Like it's just so, there's so much happening in that song, and it's like 9 minutes of fucking guitar bliss.
And let's not forget the Hot Chicken songs.
The Hot Chicken songs, yes.
Both awesome. And
I love
incidentally,
how fucking eerie the first Hot Chicken track is.
It's like I was listening to it late at night, and it was just viscerally a terrifying song.
And we didn't even mention like another one of the best Yo La Tengo songs, which is the opening track, Decora.
Oh yeah, Decorum's great.
Throws you into this like world of sound that they have, and it's like there's so much.
You can't even understand what she's saying on the chorus, and it's great.
What I like about Electra Pura is like, it's like a counterpoint to I Can Hear the Heart Beating is one, and Painful, I guess, because those are really like refined albums that are produced quite cleanly. Even the noisy parts have this kind of like consistent sort of satisfying like tidiness to them, whereas Electra Pura is just this much kind of noisier and rougher around the edges album, both in terms of construction and production. And it's just like the noisier guitar jam passages just sound much more unhinged than those similar sorts of passages on their other records. It just has this whole like feeling of like a garage rock sort of like live recording type of thing that is, I don't think any of their other albums really have this feeling. Just Electra Pura has this like unhinged, unfiltered like liveness to it, and all the noise is just so like it hits really hard.
I don't know if I'd fully agree, but that's a fair observation. But it's really good. That's the main point. Listen to it if you haven't. And incidentally, what I was going to mention, the Hot Chicken songs, I realized are a reference to one of my favorite country bands ever, the Flying Burrito Brothers, because of their songs Hot Burrito Number 1 and Number 2, which are where those titles come from.
Amazing.
Damn.
That's so fucking, that's such a fucking cool niche.
It's such a Yo La Tengo thing to do. Like from a Motel 6 also being an example of that title spoofage. Also on the topic of bands I really love, from Cynic, I finally listened to their debut Focus. Bit of a progressive metal ? Classic.
It's like if Daft Punk made a progressive metal album.
It fucking rips.
It's just unlike anything else I've heard aside from Trace Air. Which, and
one more time, the sickest Rick you've ever heard in your life.
I mean, it's not really like Daft Punk. I was just alluding to the vocoder on that album.
Just joke about Path to Dunk.
I don't want anyone thinking that I think Daft Punk sounds exactly like Cynic's Focus. But,
this man for real just said Path Dunk.
I'm losing my mind, I swear.
But the thing about Cynic's Focus is that you put it on and you're like, what?
Yeah. No,
but how does it compare with the second album for you?
I mean, I like this. The second one's like one of my 25 favorite albums ever. And I think that album's
Fair enough.
a bit more refined than this, I'll be honest, even if that is not necessarily
I
the
love
popular take.
my favorite thing I've seen today is in the Rim comment box for Focus.
Oh yeah.
And it says this beautiful comment: Singer Mans has times sounding like Yoda monster from Star Wars.
Yeah, I see that too. It's so funny. I don't
And
even
he's
know what
not
it
wrong.
means. He's not wrong, but it's like a drunk person wrote a review of Focus.
I mean, I think that's what happens if you like listen to Focus like 5 times in a row. Your brain turns into that.
Yeah, fair enough.
Aspirational, frankly.
All right, so to close up, I'm going to talk about 2 singer-songwriter records I listened to from one of my favorites, Warren Zevon. I listened to his 1976 self-titled album, Warren Zevon, which is a record with a number of really, it's like neither of the records I listened to, and something I've learned about Zevon's kind of albums themselves is that he is a man who lacks focus generally, but he focus and consistency, but what he does not lack is creativity and imagination. Because this record opens with it's got some of the most fun songwriting ever, mixed with just some absolutely devastating ballads, and it's all just really consistent, well delivered, piano-centric rock music. And yeah, I mean, it's just such a joy to listen to, and the way and this I think is his best structured album, particularly with Frank and Jesse James being first and Desperados Under the Eaves being last.
Great song. I haven't heard this album in full, but I have heard that song, and that's a fucking fantastic song.
It works even better in the context of the album, believe it or not.
I need to fucking listen to this.
And I'm not even going to get into why that is, because it's something you'll just get once you listen to it. But yeah, it's fantastic. That record's fantastic. Not as good as Excitable Boy. Not a lot is.
Yeah, I can't remember what context it was in, but I read a really like Stephen Hayden, my favorite music writer, has raved about Zevon's like entire discography and like loves basically every album he's put out. And the way he writes about it really makes me want to listen to them all. He has had a really like dark and ugly but fascinating life.
His life story's very interesting and reflects in his discography in interesting ways as well.
Yeah like he released like a trilogy of albums about like his impending death in the early 2000s before he died.
Oh my god.
And
it's allegedly one of his best like periods in his career, so I'm kind of building to that.
Yeah, no, I think it would be a really fascinating discography to just dive into completely, because there seem to be very few misses. And I've heard really good things about Sentimental Hygiene as well, so I want to listen to all of them. He's such a unique personality.
Oh yeah,
no one else like him.
He's like a Hunter S. Thompson of music. Is
great comp.
Oh yeah, wow.
So, but I also listened to his album Bad Luck Streak in Dancing School. This comes from 1980 and sees him playing around with some new wave instruments and synthesizers. It does not entirely pan out, I will be perfectly honest. But a lot from that era didn't either. Yeah. But when it hits on tracks like Jungle Work, it's awesome. And then, you've got the title track, which is about not being able to have sex in a whorehouse.
Damn. My guy's down bad.
Yeah. But, and the whole album also, this one goes out to Jake and Morgan, features a song co-written by Bruce Springsteen.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me either. Yeah.
Jeannie Needs a Shooter, and that song's immaculate.
Yeah.
I'm down.
One does.
I have also heard the title track on this record, which I really enjoy as well. From what I can gather, large portions of this man's career, songwriting wise, simply amount to "My dick don't work," and I.
Yeah.
So true, King.
Well, it's my dick. Well, Warren Zevon has multiple moods. It's my dick don't work. Naming weird African countries, and desperados, guerrillas, or mercenaries and hitmen. These are the 3 songs you will find on a Warren Zevon album, and it's awesome.
Let's go.
I can't wait until he combines all 3 of those things and talks about an impotent hitman who goes to Kenya.
I'm sure he'll do it the second that you bring him back from the dead, Jake.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, hold on a sec.
The only first listen I did this week was Beach House's 7, which I don't quite feel comfortable rating yet, just because I want to spend some more time with it. But that is my favorite of theirs. I have also only heard Bloom, so did some re-listening this week. On the car ride home, I re-listened to Pearl Jam's Vitalogy in full for the first time in quite a while. A fundamentally cracked album.
Real ones always listen to Foxy Mob Handle Mama in full. We never turn the album off until that song is finished.
No.
Otherwise, you're simply not experiencing Vitalogy.
You have not experienced the vision of these 5 people who have lost
Crack,
it.
rock, cocaine.
It's a fundamentally
Amazing.
fucking unhinged album, but what works about it is like the moments where it's like some of the greatest songwriting you've ever heard are like just as emotionally unhinged as the moments where they're just like fucking making noise. And
Nothing Man, the best Pearl Jam song.
I mean, that's a very good take. I don't even know what my favorite song on that album would be. It feels like it changes every time I think about that record.
Yeah, I don't know.
I feel like the obvious choice would be Corduroy, but I don't know if that is my absolute favorite. I'd have to go back to it.
I don't even know if that's in my top 5 on that album. That's how stupid that shit is.
What a man.
Fucking A. Divinita stays on during sex.
Good lord.
Especially because it comes right after Better Man, which stays off during sex.
Is there a fundamentally less sexy song?
She once believed every story he had to. Just fucking crying.
That would be like putting on black before you have sex.
Pro Jam just fundamentally probably not a good band to have sex to, like even with their bangers.
I'm gonna make it
grunge as a whole.
I'm gonna make it a mission to find out one day. Need me a freak like Eddie.
In the music video for Black, Eddie is.
I mean, yeah, he is.
That's been it for this episode of the Gems and Tea podcast. We'll see you next week.
Gave a re-listen.
Disappointingly hetero of you, August.
What? I don't even know what you're saying anymore, quite honestly. Like I'm like over here. You guys are in fucking Saturn or something. I don't even know what's happening anymore.
Well, this is a refreshing change of pace from every single interaction I have with you.
Wonderful.
Said that was such venom.
August is over here just like, did you see the new anime from the Who's a What's It? And I'm like, yeah, totally, man.
Okay, that's me too, though. You gotta. I'm also the weeb.
Well, yes, but you don't tie it in with jokes that are like so non sequitur.
I do.
That like,
I
no,
do.
you don't. No, you don't. Never mind. The other thing I listened to this week was Nujabes' Modal Soul.
Yeah.
It's the peak of sound. Thank you.
Yes.
Good day.
That's like 3 candidates for the greatest beat of all time. Like at least.
Yeah, I thought about Modal
Tyler
Soul.
just had a moment.
I did. I made a mess. No.
Shut up. Fuck you.
What I've been listening to this week is very little. Last night, in a fit of mania, I decided to listen to every Adele album, and that segues nicely into our first review of today, which is this is the 4th album from English singer-songwriter Adele. You all know who Adele is. Adele has become such a figurehead of mom.
That one.
Yeah,
I love this part on this album where she just entirely cuts out the middleman and is like, I love wine.
Well,
like,
so
bro,
this
we
is,
know.
this is the thing about Adele. Adele has carved out a very, lucrative is an understatement, career with quite a singular and simple niche that has definitely evolved out of certain artists that have come before her, like Norah Jones and Amy Winehouse, but also transfused with like historical sort of jazz singers. And also, quite crucially, when you ask Adele about what her primary influences are, she gives off artists like the Spice Girls and Pink. And I think what that speaks to, despite the fact you can't really hear that in what she does, is that she has an uncanny ability to take like traditionally popular forms of jazz singing and pop soul singing and infuse it with a spirit and a blues that's distinctly modern, distinctly a result of this kind of trend of artists in the 2000s, culminating in Amy Winehouse, who added this kind of like spunky character to their like traditional sort of soul blues singing. And Adele, to be fair, isn't the most sort of transgressive or like creative artist within that particular lens. She has not exactly made it. She is not exact. No, I mean, I'm just talking about within pop soul, right? She hasn't exactly carved a career out of, carving new niches out or like exploring sonically new sort of unique idiosyncratic artistic possibilities. She very much has the Adele template. It has very clear antecedents. And she has made a remarkably successful career out of mining the Adele template quite consistently. And that template is sad woman at a piano singing her fucking heart out and having the pipes to elevate quite standard songwriting. And even she would be the first to admit that, to a realm of what in the public consciousness for a lot of people in this case being redefined to be mums, feel to be quite emotionally powerful. And I mean, I'm that comes across as a little bit condescending. She does make a lot of emotionally powerful music. I even think so. I listen to all her records, and all of them have real fucking gusto and just grit in them. They're not the most.
You're forgetting the gays as well.
Yeah,
the mums and the gays.
The gays too,
Yes.
although I think they've come along a little bit later to proceedings. But yeah, very much. If you listen to her biggest songs, if you listen to tracks like Rolling in the Deep and you listen to tracks like Someone Like You, and you listen to tracks like Hello and When We Were Young off of her last record, like those are all really fucking powerful songs. Like those are all really strong executions of the core basic aesthetic that Adele roots. And she demonstrates that you don't have to, like, she demonstrates how far a voice like hers can actually take you. In many ways, to me, like being a person who's not terribly into pop soul, Adele is kind of like a textbook example of wasted potential to a certain extent, because her voice could be used to so much more grandiose and ambitious extents if she were interested in pursuing that. But she is very much just interested in working within this lane of, you know, the heartbroken singer-songwriter. And I mean, this is her second, she's done 4 albums. This is her second breakup album. And I mean, it's all 4 of her albums are tinged by heartbreak and sadness with regard to relationships to a certain extent. And I mean, to talk about, you know, she's the definition of an artist who works within this very limited niche and is doing a shtick at this point. And I think that really gets at the limitations of her music. I mean, the fact that her biggest album, I think the best-selling album worldwide of the 21st century so far, which is 21, you know, the whole thing about that is it is her breakup record, and all the big singles are like these scathing fuck you songs. And here she's essentially doing that again, but she's shifting the emotional emphasis, right? So this is her divorce album, but it's not a fuck you record. It's a I'm so fucked up record. That's, I think, the way in which it distinguishes itself from 21, the big sort of other breakup album. Is that's an album about being pissed off at someone who's broken your heart, and this is an album about internalizing all of the negative emotion that comes out of a divorce. You know, in many ways, it's like it doesn't have a million miles of difference emotionally between something like Björk's Volnakura, which we've already alluded to in this episode of the podcast. But of course, it is within Adele's pop soul niche. Yeah, I mean, what do you guys think? What do you guys, first of all, like, what is your guys' opinion on Adele before you even sit down to listen to this record? And how does this album compare to what your perception / opinion of Adele was? Is it sort of slightly better than you were expecting? Is it slightly worse than you were expecting? Or is it about exactly what you were expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I've been listening to Adele in some capacity since the beginning because, and say it with me, folks, my mom is a big fan. And, you know, I like Adele a fair bit, at least within the realm of popular music. The definition, picture textbook definition of a singles artist, if you ask me. I think her cover of Make You Feel My Love is like
absolutely
God
tier. Yeah,
God Almighty.
I mean, it's better than the original, and the original is by fucking Bob Dylan. Like it's
and admittedly, Dylan sounds like he's asleep on that recording. So you know,
sure.
Your face.
Yes, but also it rules. And yeah, Adele's version is better. I had a lot of affection for that really early stuff that she did when it was much more modest. Like her first album has some like songs that people don't know, but they're much more. I think some of her most enduring songs are some of the deep cuts on that first album, like Hometown Glory, for instance, which is I know that was one I think a breakthrough single for her, but no one ever plays it anymore, and that song fucking rules. So yeah,
there's all of those albums have those moments. What was the last one? 25.
Yeah, the last one was 25.
That was 6 years ago. That one less so. I didn't gravitate to any of the singles in the way that I did on the first 2 so much, but that it's only to a varying degree. I think most of them were pretty strong, and this is once again exactly the case with 30. Easy on Me is staggering in its conviction and performance. It's a song that has been sung 1,000 times, and she makes it sound like she did it for the first time all over again. That is just sheer performance prowess, and I can't take away a bit of that, nor would I want to, because the song's just that damn good. Oh My God is a similar moment without quite reaching those highs. And outside of a few scant moments, it's another Adele album. Mm-hmm.
I think something that's worth remarking on that feels like the biggest thing, because I listened to all 4 of her records back to back, and the biggest thing I've noticed is her voice has gotten better with age.
Yeah.
Like part of it, I know I read on her Wikipedia page was because she had vocal cord surgery, I think shortly after she made 21. And that ended up, because she had a polyp on her vocal cords, but they ended up extending her vocal range. And I think that, incidentally, I'll say, just to kind of be a fun little counter to Morgan, I think that 25 is probably her strongest album front to back, even if I do share Morgan's adoration to a certain extent of those early singles. Like the singles on 21 are universally fantastic. And that's an album that does have some pretty good deep cuts as well, although it also has a cover of The Cure's Love Song, which is not good in my opinion. And
it's there.
Yeah. Anyway,
glad to say I have not heard this.
Anyway, the thing that
oh, I mean, it's far from like nightmarish or anything, but it's also just
it just completely loses the emotional tone of the original, which is a big, you're gonna cover The Cure and you're gonna strip the emotion out of it, then what are you doing?
Yeah.
Anyway, my point being, 25 I thought was the most consistent record she'd made front to back up to this point, in terms of like lacking some of the lows of the first 2 records. But I will say I think that 30 is the record where her voice sounds better than ever, and there are particular moments that really stand out to me. I don't have a lot to say, so I'll just say it right now. My favorite song on this new record is To Be Loved, which I think is the most vocally impressive recording that Adele's ever done, to a point where I could see some people maybe finding it a bit overbearing and how intense it is vocally. But I was just really struck by how powerful and how like she was able to level up the intensity of what she was doing vocally and emotionally more and more and more when you think she's hit her ceiling within the song. And that really impressed me. Hold On, I thought, was impressive for similar reasons. And I concur with what Morgan said about Easy on Me as well. Like that is one of my favorite singles she's ever put out, because it's elementally simple. It's not doing anything she hasn't done before, but it's refining it, and it's the emotional tone of it as well, because it's a song that's written to her child rather than to a lover. Adds something a bit different to, it adds a different kind of emotional weight to it than previous songs. Like if it were just another song like, written to a, to your ex-husband, like another Someone Like You, for instance, the shtick would have been overdone. But the fact that there's this album, a lot of it is written not to her ex-husband but to her child, as a way of kind of like explaining or trying to like emotionally unpack or emotionally prepare her young child for the realities of the divorce. That narrative and the way it kind of filters through the best songs on this record, I think does add something that elevates this album above, merely just another Adele record. It doesn't elevate it hugely, but it's appreciated at the bare minimum.
As somebody who's really only familiar with her through those singles, to counter you and Morgan's perspective anyway, is that you two obviously have heard those records. I have not. So this is my first full-length album from her. And, she can sing. She's got a great voice. I've heard those singles before. And honestly, the first half of this album really impressed me. Like, I wasn't expecting something incredible. I wasn't expecting to like love this album, but some people had given it some good reviews, and like, I expected, more or less like a well put together, like classy record. But I mean, it's what you were talking about, Tyler. It's the fact that it has that sort of emotional depth of her talking not only about herself, about heartbreak and about the divorce, but to her child, which definitely adds a lot to those singles. I do think that Easy on Me and the song that follows it, My Little Love, really, really benefit from that. And I think Strangers by Nature is probably my favorite song on here, mainly because of the production. I think this is one of the most interestingly produced songs on here, just because it kind of changes up from that whole very traditional sounding piano strings combo to something with a little bit more flavor.
Worth noting that the arrangement on this song was co-written by the composer Ludwig Göransson.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes complete and perfect sense to me. And, you know, it doesn't like, I think I agree with Morgan. I think Oh My God is a similarly like good early album sort of high point. And I don't think that it's like got a perfect part. I think that Cry Your Heart Out is a decent song. And I think Can I Get It is just kind of like fine. It's a perfectly average kind of mediocre song.
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of fucking hate that song. It's the only song. It's the only song on the record I don't really enjoy, and it's mostly just because of those fucking whistles. That whistling noise is so corny. It's the Adele does this on each record. Like she brings in Max Martin, legendary pop producer Max Martin, to produce one song, and usually in the past their collaborations have been highlights. Like the song they collaborated on 25, Send My Love to Your New Lover, was my favorite song on that record and my favorite single from that album. Really great pop song. When Adele does that pop mode thing with the minimalist thing and she brings in someone like Max Martin, she can really excel. But Can I Get It is just such a fucking, it's so annoying in a way those other songs aren't.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that song is like perfectly all right until the whistling comes in.
And fuck off.
Stop that.
Definitely the weakest part of the first leg of the album for me. And then the second half comes in, and the second half is a fucking mess. First of all, fucking Woman Like Me.
Yeah, that's my least favorite.
Fuck?
That's my least favorite on the second half. I'll agree.
I mean, like, literally, like, it sounds fine and all, but, like, lyrically speaking, it's just like, God, Adele, did you girl boss a little too close to the fucking sun? It's so, like, I mean, it's so fucking, like, this is the epitome of just, like, oh, fuck a man kind of storytelling, where it's just kind of like, I know that she's, like, playing to her audience, and I know the perspective from which this is written, and she comes off like a human being for the rest of this album. And on this particular song, it is so condescendingly written, and, like, I don't really think this is intentional. I don't think this is, like, a song where she's like displaying her bitterness as well. It's just kind of like, oh, why isn't this guy good enough for me? And it's just kind of like, shut up.
I will freely concede it's the one moment on the album that kind of shoots my Adele is less bitter here thesis in the foot. And it is a low light. I'll agree with you there.
And like the real problem here is that the best moments of the second half of the album are about as good as the lesser moments on the front half for me, which again, there's not a huge disparity or anything, but it's just like when you have the first half that's batting between, 3.5 out of 5 star songs, and then you have like one odd 5 or 6, and then the second half is nothing but a 4, a 4, and a 4. You know what I'm fucking talking about. I'm not trying to fucking numbers, but I have to say, To Be Loved, great vocal performance. I find this song wholly redundant lyrically. Every single sentiment that's addressed here is a sentiment that she's not only expressed in past singles, but on this exact album. And it's like platitude upon platitude upon platitude. It's just like, could you please, I know you're capable of writing more interesting lyrics. You did it on this album like 2 songs ago. Please do it again. And like it's a good, it's fine. It's fine.
I think it really does suffer from placement. Because the back half of the album is like 6-minute song followed by 6.5-minute song followed by 6.5-minute song.
Yeah,
and it's a lot.
That damned it so much.
It's so long, and it really doesn't need to be, especially when these songs are redundant, especially when To Be Loved comes right after Hold On, which honestly, same exact problem with To Be Loved, except worse. Like every single lyric on this song feels like it's just platitude, 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 and it just has a less impressive vocal performance. And it's just like, and honestly, Love Is a Game as a closer, I think is weak. I get nothing from this fucking song at all. And it's like, by the time you get to this at this point in the album, it's just like everything on here is found elsewhere. And also, like, I've been sitting here listening to this for fucking like 45 minutes. Can we please, like again, I don't think this album's bad or even mediocre. I think that the good songs on here genuinely do level it up to being a barely good record. It has enough great moments to I think keep it confidently in the very acceptable range. But at the same time, that second half, paired with the length and paired with the fact that Adele is in that one production and delivery mode, it's like, oh man, it makes the second half of this feel like a goddamn eternity.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think it is worth noting this is by some margin the longest Adele record. Like there aren't her other records are all at least 10 minutes shorter than this. And so I think, yeah, it does suffer from bloat, to be sure. I think, honestly, my opinion is I think the second half is about as good as the first half, which is to say patchy. But I can't take away from the fact that, you know, Adele's sort of anodyne lyricism has always been one of the things that has held her back, particularly on her album Deep Cuts. And so I suppose where I come from is like her voice is so good on most of those songs, not all of them for sure, to the same extent, but on tracks like To Be Loved and on tracks like I Drink Wine and on tracks like Love Is a Game, that it becomes a little bit easier to overlook some of the lyrical limitations to a certain extent.
Yeah, but it's also like good in the same way,
sure,
all the time, you know. Like I get that I make this criticism of a lot of albums a lot. I had the same thing to say about the Leanne LaHavis album last year, but it's just like I really want these technically talented singers to use their voice a little bit more flexibly, where it's just, or better example, the Miley Cyrus album. Vocally, she has a great voice, but she always used it in the exact same way for the entire duration of the album. And it's just like, please, I'm begging you, please.
Yeah. There are
some instrumental variation might be nice as well.
Yeah, there are little moments where she varies it up, like the reggae influence of Cry Your Heart Out is quite nifty. I think that's a Greg Kirsten produced track, I think. But it's like, these are little variations that aren't still necessarily that new for Adele either, because she's done these kinds of things before. Like with 21, the whole thing about that record was that it took her kind of like, you know, bluesy approach, and it's kind of infused more kind of Americana sort of Southern blues vibes into the arrangements and performance. And she's always kind of like tweaked the formula just enough to have like certain things stand out and make you go, huh, okay. But it's never, it's kind of like a limited bag of tricks that it feels like the Max Martin thing with Can I Get It? That's a perfect example, right? Where she does something, she knows she needs to do something to kind of mix the album up a bit. And she just goes back to the well and does things that she's done before to do that. And it really results in Adele records that aren't bad. Again, I do have fondness for a good chunk of this album, but it's like, it very much feels like Adele by the numbers. Like she's following a particular formula. And I know that she doesn't mean to be, because she's very like forthright and emotionally upfront about like how much her songwriting and making albums means to her, and like how much thought and time she puts into it. One of my favorite parts of this news cycle is that she convinced Spotify to stop like auto defaults shuffle playing albums when people start playing albums. She convinced them to like get rid of that default feature because she cares so much
about.
That's
a default feature on Spotify?
Apparently, I don't fucking use it, but
I think it's when you're not paying for it.
Yeah. But anyway, that's apparently not.
Still, that's a fucking stupid thing to do.
Yeah, but apparently she convinced them to just completely remove that. And so it shows that she does genuinely give a shit about like constructing an album and like making a cohesive project. But what I think that she lacks is like the sufficient level of ambition to really like take what the skills that she has and really push them and not continue kind of like returning to the well. And I think it's one thing that this is emblematic of, or one thing that represents this nicely, is the fact that with each album she's put out, like when she was making 21, she was like, I'm not going to do the number thing. I'm gonna, and then she did the number thing. She named it after her age. With 25, she's like, I'm not gonna do the number thing. And then she ended up calling it 25. And then she said, okay, I've completed the age trilogy. It's done. My next album, I'm gonna be moving on to something new. And here we have 30. And it's like Adele has sort of ideas about how she wants to sort of develop and grow as an artist, but ends up kind of like almost magnetically getting pulled into this particular aesthetic and niche that she has come up in. And I mean, yeah, it gives the sense of, I don't know, I don't want to project onto Adele, but it gives the sense of an artist making albums out of obligation or out of like, it's time to make another album. Like she said she was going to retire after her last album, but evidently
imagining her signing her divorce papers and being like, well, time to get to writing.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the thing. Like, she said she was going to retire.
Some new material cooking up now.
And so obviously she felt the need to come out of retirement to make this record. She doesn't strike me as the kind of person who's in it for the money. But I don't know. It's like, I don't know what it is. I hope that she can kind of kick out of this groove, because 4 albums and you're still like working within this palette, and it's yeah. She's refining that palette, to be sure. Like she's getting better at it, but it's also like that brushing up against the limits. You can only refine it so much, you know?
It's like you're polishing like a dull stone, and under the surface of it is another dull stone that's got a little less grit to it. I mean, I guess to give my opinion on it, I'll be brief just because I want to move on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, did you hate this or did it lull you to sleep?
It lulled me to sleep more than anything. And I mean, kind of going into this with the expectation of like knowing this was not going to be for me certainly made the impact a lot less dramatic, because it's like at this point I'm like, I know I'm not the target audience. Whatever. She's a talented singer. She's a fine writer who can really elevate things with her voice. Some of the production, I think there are some interesting production choices where it's like, I wish you had written a different song for this that would have been, a little more ambitious and exciting. But I don't know. There's a certain point I have to ask myself, how mad can I get at this? And the answer is not a lot, if at all, really, where it's like, this isn't for me. I can acknowledge that. I'm listening to it out of obligation at this point, so be it,
Yeah.
What's interesting, just to kind of, I guess, as a point to wrap up on, is like, obviously Easy on Me was a huge song, and obviously this album is going to sell. It has already sold large units, but I'm almost feeling like, and maybe it'll be a delayed thing where like the singles will kind of like catch on, but I'm feeling like this may be like Adele's least memorable record in terms of like commercial appeal. Like
yeah, seems like it.
And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Like I think it speaks to like her set, because she said in interviews like, I didn't come into this record like thinking, oh, I've got to make a hit. I just came in to write the songs I wanted to write. And so, but I do wonder if, the lack of instant sort of cultural canonization of this record compared to like her other records having like such amazing singles will lead Adele to go down a different path in the future. And then that might be interesting to see. I just don't think Adele can get away with making another album like this. I think this was really pushing it. And I think she gets away with it because of all the ways in which she has refined her songwriting. And, it does sound really, really great. I think it's the best sounding Adele record, definitely. But not to do a Jesse Pinkman, but she can't keep getting away with it. Come on. The next album,
she can't keep getting away with it.
I mean, you're not fucking Ed Sheeran and Adele, fucking handshake emoji, not actually titling your albums.
Okay, I thought you were about to make a comparison between like what they do as artists, and I was like, okay, maybe broadly, but let's not compare Adele to Ed fucking Sheeran.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna go ahead and say that she absolutely can keep getting away with this because she releases these fairly sparsely 6 years since the last
fair
one.
Enough, yeah.
And everything in the meantime that charts, at least in England, is, you know, the fucking Ed Sheerans of the world.
Or the fucking like, who was last year who was like basically trying to be like male Adele but boring, that fucking Louis Capaldi. Ugh.
It's so much of this shit is either boring or just doesn't sound like music. And to have somebody come along every 5 or 6 years that actually does is so refreshing to the large quantities of people that have such a narrow view of what they listen to.
Yeah,
my point here is that the pop music in England is so much worse than anywhere else.
Yeah.
Like, Jesus.
I think you make a good point. And I guess my only thing to say to that would be, well, yes, Adele has the power to like make trends and to kind of paint the way forward for pop music. And she's done that beautifully with her sparse, you know, pop soul blues ballad style. And I want to see her get like, I want to see her do records with more songs like Rumor Has It on them. I want to see her to make a record that has some like, you know, some more of the personality that she kind of came up with as well. Not that this record doesn't have it, but it's like so maudlin. And it feels like Adele has made a lot of music that has this kind of emotional tone. And I get that she needs to, it's her life and she's processing through the music. But I want to see more personality, and I want to see that coming out in the way that she sings. And I want to see that coming out in the musical style as well. I want to see, I don't know what, I want to see her like, I want to see her ray of light is what I want to see. I want to see her to do a record like that. Do a dance record, Adele. You won't, you're scared.
Yes, she is.
I mean, I have nothing else to say.
Favorite tracks and ratings.
That's you, man.
I was waiting for like subs. Who fucking. My 3 favorite tracks are Strangers by Nature, Easy on Me, and Oh My God. Least favorite track, definitely Woman Like Me. Wrestling between a 5.5 and a 6. I'll just round up and say 6 out of 10.
Alrighty. August.
Man, who cares? Fuck you. Who cares? Fuck you. 5.
August said, yeah, 30, all right. Divided by 6. August divided the album title by Jake's score and said, here, there you go.
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah.
Bitch.
Standard deviation is gonna be interesting. Fucking the goddamn my 3 favorites are Easy on Me, Oh My God, and I will also say I Drink Wine. I like that song quite a bit, even though I took the piss earlier. Least favorite, I think My Little Love sounds really interesting, and then there's just snippets of her kid on it for a little bit there, and you know, we talked about this on the Toby Mac video. Stop.
Fucking so it sounds just like Oliver Twist or something, like, please sir, may I have some more?
Mummy, why is Daddy not coming home?
It was a choice. It was the wrong one. 6 out of 10.
All right. Well, my favorite tracks are Easy on Me, To Be Loved, and Love Is a Game. And my least favorite track is Can I Get It? No, you can't. I'm gonna divide the album title by August score and give it a 6.
Hey.
And
hey,
And that makes an average of 5.8 for Miss Adele. The same average. So funny to me.
Oh.
The same average as the new Thrice record, which is just funny for me for reasons I don't
Look,
know how to fully articulate.
all I'm saying is that Billie Eilish made an album that's this album, but like better.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Billie Eilish famously put out an amazing divorce album this year. Sorry.
Sending our love.
Well,
All right. So
why am I on this show?
why are we here?
Just to suffer.
Next up on the slate is the new
I've been waiting for this. It wasn't exactly announced like a super long time ago, so it hasn't been like something that I've been looking forward to all year, but Lord knows if it had been announced earlier, I would have been. This is certainly one of my most anticipated releases of the year, considering I have covered both the discography of Chelsea Wolfe and the discography of Converge broadly. Very positive on both. Go check out either video if you want to know my finer details. But yeah, big fan of both of them. And I think while yes, Kurt Ballou was involved with the recording of her album Hiss Spun in 2017, I think the most interesting thing about the prospect of a Chelsea Wolfe and Converge, and of course the guitarist of Mutoid Man and Caven, the most exciting thing about this album as a prospect is that it's basically just like as an idea, totally fucking unprecedented. Converge as a band have sort of like stayed in their metalcore lane for, I mean, as long as they've been making music, since the mid 90s. But the thing is that once I really took a look at Blood Moon and then looked at the trajectory of both of these artists, the more and more this made perfect sense to me. Because in the past decade, Converge's last two records, All We Love, We Leave Behind, and The Dusk in Us, two of my favorite records of theirs, have been albums that have been decidedly more of a departure from the rest of their sound, that have taken influence from stuff like post-hardcore and just kind of veered away from that whole like Axe to Fall, No Heroes, post-Jane Doe stuff. And they've begun to explore more interesting facets of their sound. My favorite Converge song is the title track off of The Dusk in Us. And that's a song that's just so big and doomy and slow. And, you know, it's nothing like those 2-minute ragers that they're known for. And Chelsea, as she's gone further and further, has displayed an interest in making her sound heavier and heavier, ultimately culminating on Hiss Spun. So them ultimately becoming intertwined as Converge seeks to sort of change it up a little bit in the late career that they've had going, because you know those two records were received really, really well. So you know, them continuing to go down this more experimental venture makes a whole lot of sense, and Chelsea going in a heavier direction also makes sense. So them coming together to make this is natural, and in my estimation, this is basically the best possible version of itself that I could have asked for. I have, you know, as expected, I'm sure, have nothing but good things to say about Blood Moon. This is one of the most dynamic and interesting releases from either of these artists, if you ask me, that ranks easily amongst the best stuff that either of them have ever done. Not quite to maybe the totemic highs of something that I would say that, you know, maybe like Hiss Spun or my two favorite Converge records, maybe not that like perfect polished sheen of like, you know, complete and utter artistic peak. But here, I think the best thing about this is that it's so much more than what I would expect at face value. The cool thing about this is that, like, yeah, the metalcore influence on this album is certainly here, but this is not a metalcore album at all. In fact, this is an atmospheric sludge metal album, if I can label it broadly as anything. But even then, it doesn't stay in one lane. It is, even on a, like, within certain songs, it will change up what it is based on whatever Converge and Chelsea want to do in a given moment. The opener, Blood Moon, is a fantastic way to start the album. It was the sort of lead single that they let off with, and it remains as fucking amazing to me as it was when it came out. I think one of my favorite moments in music this year is the very, very end of the song, where it just sort of those fucking the riffs amidst the wall of sound that this become just sort of fucking crash repetitively, and it's fucking awesome. One of the other cool things about this is that you get to see the vocalist of Converge flexing what a dynamic singing voice that he actually has, a little bit more like with The Dusk in Us. It's not just the screaming, it's not just the more like one note extreme music thing. He gets to get a little like moody, a little campy, blends very, very well with Chelsea's vocal chemistry, I think. And that's one of the cool things about this that I like, is that this is gothic with a capital fucking G. This is theatrical, it's campy, it's big. Like the whole like setup is that this is whole like this cycle of this blood moon, this fucking thing, which is basically like Converge and Chelsea Wolfe just being like, yeah, let's make a concept album about Bloodborne. And it's like, oh, fucking okay. And then when the band decide to lean into their traditional strengths, I think they're as good as they've ever been. Immediately, you get Viscera of Man after Blood Moon, which is just fucking devastatingly heavy. Oh my God. Like, I'm so glad that they didn't elect to completely abandon the things that made them what they are, even though this is an album that is decidedly more adventurous for both of them. You get tracks like Viscera of Man, you get tracks like Lord of Liars, which I also think is a standout high point on this. You get Chelsea Wolfe singing over a Converge song, which is just the best fucking thing ever. And then you also have things like Coil, which are decidedly, they have like, this has like stuff from Chelsea's earlier folk influences, like stuff on Apocalypsis. Same with something like Scorpion Sting, which is like a weird siren song that's just so fucking evil. And the acoustic instrumentation that's implemented throughout here is just fucking stellar. And I can go on and on about each of these, but really the thing you need to know is that these are dynamic songs. These are restless songs that take full advantage of the fact that they have these converging influences from these bands and from this artist. I think the album highlight for me personally, even though it's an album full of highlights, is the penultimate track, Crimson Stone, which is just anthemic and blistering and catchy. There's an unexpected amount of hooks on this album too, which I think was very, very well appreciated by me, and also showcased on this track in particular. And oh man, this is just one of the best things that either of these groups have made. I mean, like, it's as good as any like closing climactic moment that either of them have ever made. It's just, you know, capital H heavy, and it following right off of the track Diamond 2, which is just like nonstop blistering heaviness. This is just everything that I hoped it would be. If I have any complaints, honestly, it's really just in that I think that the band maybe they haven't perfected their synergy yet, because at least in terms of how they've blended everything, I feel a little bit more Converge than I do Chelsea Wolfe. I think it's kind of a 60-40 split. Maybe they haven't figured out exactly how to balance it out between the two of them. But that said, like, most of the album highlights for me do come from a lot of Chelsea's vocal performances. Some of her screams on here, like on the title track, are just fucking chilling. But, you know, if they're to develop this project later on, I think that that's something that they'll probably get a little bit better at. But
it's such a fucking tiny ass complaint. There's not a song on here that I think is really lesser than the others, and I enjoy every second of it. This is a huge highlight of the year for me, and I am so glad it was not a disappointment for me in any way, as someone who just adores both of these artists.
Yeah, I can second pretty much all of that.
Fucking go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll say, obviously I'm glad this was not disappointing. Doy. What I'm extra glad about is that it wasn't just Chelsea Wolfe with Converge as the backing band, or Chelsea Wolfe just singing over Converge tracks. It almost feels a bit silly to that. Will you shut up? It almost seems funny to me that this is being labeled as Converge and Chelsea Wolfe, because I think it would just be more apt for it to be called Blood Moon, because this sounds like an entirely new thing altogether. And I just like, the truth is I haven't got to, I know I haven't gotten to spend as much time with it as I would like to, but like, Jesus, it's good.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really sharp observation, right? Like the synergy of the band and of Chelsea is obviously fantastic, and it works because neither are necessarily staying too much within their conventional wheelhouse. Like a lot of people have remarked on how, you know, for a Converge album, you know, it's considerably less heavy and less intense and more sort of atmospheric and layered and then, you know, some of their more aggressive releases. And I will concede that I definitely took some adjustment to that fact. Like my favorite moments of this record unequivocally are the moments that are a little more of the most sort of intense and fiery stuff. Like I think the record opened particularly strongly with that first 3-track run. I think there's just a lot of intensity there. Viscera of Man's my favorite thing here too as well. It just feels like worlds ending sort of in the way that the best latter day Converge stuff does. Like some of my favorite tracks of theirs have that kind of sense of just apocalyptic weight. Despite the fact that, you know, broadly this is a less, you know, intense record comparatively speaking than some of the more recent Converge stuff, although I guess you can see them sort of signaling this kind of like more atmospheric direction with those last two records, as you said, Jake, compared to the stuff they put out in the 2000s. Yeah, there's a lot to enjoy here. I like the certain elements, the elements of the record where the heaviness is kind of less pronounced, but there is a greater focus on melody. And songs like Flower Moon, for instance, and Lord of Liars and Diamond are definitely really, really strong. I will say that some of the shorter tracks here do leave less of an impact personally on me than some of the longer pieces. I'm definitely more drawn to, like I said, those first 3 tracks than I am to songs like Failure Forever and Tongues Playing Dead and the closing track here, each of which I think is fine. It's pretty good actually, but feel don't stick in my memory, let's say, as much as some of the more totemic moments on this project. I would say that if I were to compare it to my favorite sort of Converge records, I would say it sort of doesn't quite hit the top tier or the higher tier of that sort of that level of quality. But if I were to compare it to my favorite Chelsea Wolfe records, I would say that it's definitely up there. That just speaks to the fact that I generally enjoy Converge a bit more than I do Chelsea. But yeah, that's kind of a bit limited of a way of thinking about it anyway. It's a good project for what it is. I think that the fact that it's titled as the first is very promising, because I feel like there's still a lot more potential to be mined here as well, to potentially even explore music that is even less metallic and potentially even more sort of folky, and bringing in some of those more aspects of that might be closer to Chelsea potentially, or even going in the other direction and making a full-on like fucking sludgy doom record, which this flirts with frequently. But I think there's definitely room for this project to grow even more. I think it's a promising beginning more than a definitive masterpiece, but I enjoyed it greatly, and it's certainly one of the easiest listening Converge records in terms of just throwing something on, having something nice and heavy in your ears without being totally fucking beaten to death. Yeah, no, I enjoyed it a lot.
I even honestly like those shorter tracks for me contain some of the highlights because it's the songwriting at some of its best. I think that that might be an undervalued thing that people might overlook just because obviously Converge is something that like, you know, songwriting's not always at the forefront there, but like their past two albums and like a lot of Chelsea stuff, the the fatalism and pure embrace of like darkness on this album I feel like is not to be undersold. I think particularly like I think I love the song Failure Forever, not just because it's like a really throttling hard song, but because I think the hook is exceptionally fantastic, but it also gets at the thematic core too of just the like just the notion of like all of your personal failings being something that are like logged on to or like you have to carry with you like an anchor, which is a very Converge and a very Chelsea sentiment that I think, and that like a lot of their core ideas as thematic artists sort of congeal in that way too, and just they get to operate at like the height of their powers when they like they've had this career of them just delivering all of these definitive, interesting, exploratory records, and they get to do whatever they want here, and that sense of freedom I feel like is really really felt, and I fucking love it, and it also just sounds fucking amazing. Like when this album wants to be an absolute wall of oppressive noise, it is. But when it also wants to be a detailed and more intimate song like The Closer or Scorpion Sting or something like that, it or Flower Moon parts of, it really lets up and it really gives you those moments that again wouldn't be keeping outside of a Chelsea Wolfe thing. But like there's never a moment on this album where I can isolate a single part of it and be like, oh, this is 100% like this part of Converge, or this is 100% like this part of Chelsea. All of it remains wholly unique.
Yeah, you do have like moments on this project where it's particularly the members of Converge are really kind of like doing things that are a bit unusual for them, like Failure Forever. Jacob sings clean vocals on that track, which is, you know, is unusual. I don't think he sounds as good as much. I prefer his particular scream is just one that I love so much, but I appreciate, and I think that the branching out and the diversity of what the individual artists try to do really does add. Like Scorpion Sting, I think, is a really good sort of underrated deep cut ballad that I quite enjoy. Chelsea sounds great on it. And I think also with regard to like the arc of it, I admittedly haven't dived as deep into the songwriting as you have, Jake, so that's on me. But I do see the sweeping arc of it, and I think that it climaxes brilliantly with Crimson Stone, which is, you know, everything you said about that track, cosign. It is an absolutely fantastic, it's the sort of denouement that an album like this needs, and it does feel really earned by the time it gets to it.
Yeah, that's the coolest thing about this album is that it's so maximal. You can tell that these are seasoned artists that are making something really special, and like I feel like Converge especially feel unshackled. Like I feel like maybe their decision to do this might have been because if they saw themselves heading in a way after The Dusk in Us where they were like, if we keep going along this path under the Converge name, we might start to alienate our audience a little bit just because it's so far from Jane Doe that, I mean, like, who even knows? Like, I could totally see that being their reaction. I mean, the reception to albums that are like that record sometimes don't go over as well when you've got something like No Heroes or whatever, but like them getting to just be like, this is us getting to release our creativity and then getting to channel that through somebody like Chelsea, who has like is one of the most restless artists working today, who's just never made an album that feels wholly like the other and just hops around with genres. It's just like this thing should be this fucking, it should be disastrous, but like I want to convey that this is a special album from two artists who deserve their following and have, maybe they're not as big as something like a Radiohead or whatever, but Converge are a big, important band to the history of extreme music. And them choosing to do this and going in this direction, this feels like a real moment for them, and it feels like a moment for Chelsea. And it just really excites me. I really can't wait to see what, even if they don't collaborate on like a Blood Moon 2, what either of them do next is likely going to be something that draws on the experimental nature of what they're doing here.
August, what do you think of this record? You're notably not agnostic on Converge, but you haven't had the like connection to them that the rest of us have.
No,
you were kind of lukewarm on Jane Doe.
I'm kind of lukewarm on Jane Doe, and going into this record, I was quite skeptical because of that lukewarmness. And what really excited me was the fact that this was quite different from what I expected. I was expecting just another like straight up kind of metal core-y thing that I just wouldn't really have much of a connection with. But I got something that I actually quite enjoyed. I found the fact that this took kind of an atmospheric sludge metal direction was quite welcome to me, honestly, because I thought it really demonstrated a versatility within Converge that I hadn't really seen in their records up to this point, at least what I've heard. Oh, look, I haven't heard a lot, so
I do genuinely think, I mean, not to like throw another recommendation at you, but those two 2010s Converge albums, if you're gonna like that band, those are the albums you're gonna go to, I think. So.
All right. Point being, I thought this combination of combining Chelsea Wolfe's more angelic voice with these just kind of atmospheric, almost like doom metal inspired, and like this reminded me a lot of Black Sabbath at moments with how contemplative and just sludgy atmospheric it was getting, which that's why Jake likes it. I mean, that
self-titled Black
sense.
Sabbath, and honestly, if any of you have heard it, this reminds me a lot of the band Neurosis's album Through Silver in Blood. I think that's a huge point of inspiration on here.
That's probably like the most influential sludge metal album ever. But I can hear directly you can trace the line directly from there to something like this, which is interesting because Neurosis, haven't really come through in Converge's music before, I don't think, but you can definitely hear that here.
I guess really, and my big gripe with this is that I wish there was a little more balance between the lead singer of Converge and Chelsea Wolfe. She does not seem to play as much of a part in the musings of this record's tracks than he does. And, I kind of wish that balance was maybe a little stronger at points. And if it was, I might enjoy the record just that much more. But as it is, I find the riffs very interesting. There are a couple moments deeper in here, like shit like Scorpion Sting or like Damien. I just am like, find myself just bathing in the atmosphere that's being conveyed, and I really, really enjoy those moments. Although I would echo Tyler's sentiment that I think this isn't necessarily the apex of where this sound can go and what these two artists can produce with this sound. I think ramping it up, maybe making something, like you say, a little folkier, and I think delving even further into the sheer atmospheric side of this, and would just be the best possible idea, because I find the combination of vocalists and sounds intriguing. It just leaves me wanting more is really the best thing I can say about this, that it leaves me salivating at the mouth for what these two produce next and how this gets topped, because this is to me a great starting point that I like listening to a lot.
Yeah, I think that's the cool shared sentiment through everybody, is that we all get to just be like, damn, like regardless of our individual level of enthusiasm, it's just like, fuck, this is a project that's actually going to like fulfill its potential and maybe even more. That's
also
shit,
it
man.
may well be a project that serves for a lot of people as a gateway into both of these artists.
Oh,
because so who fucking knows? If you haven't heard anything from either of these artists before, I would say this is a pretty good place to start, to be honest, with both of them. Maybe more so
110%.
a good place to start with Converge than with Chelsea, because her stuff is just can be quite so different from this. But yeah, absolutely recommend it in either case. All right. Favorite tracks and ratings. Blood Moon. I'll go first. My 3 favorite tracks are Viscera of Men, Coil, and Crimson Stone. Least favorite is probably Blood Dawn. And I will give this album a 7.
My 3 favorites are, I'll say the title track, Blood Moon, Crimson Stone, and Coil. I don't really have a least favorite, just because I think August was really on point when he said this is best consumed as a sort of sweet-like experience, and there's not really any one moment that stands out as weaker than the one before it. And I'm gonna give this a 9.5. Why don't you cry more about it?
My 3 favorite tracks are Blood Moon, Coil, and I quite like Crimson Stone a fair bit. Least favorite, it's kind of hard to pick, just for sake of, even though I still think it's a nice song, Lord of Liars, but it's tough with it being so sweet like, because I find that totality of the experience, whatever. 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it.
Okay. For those who are sort of paid attention to what I think of both discographies and what have you, if I could place Blood Moon amongst both of them, I'd put it firmly in the top of like the A tier of Converge albums. I'd say that I like their 2 albums, You Fail Me and The Dusk in Us, a little bit more than this. But the other albums they have, I'd say this is on par with stuff like Axe to Fall and what have you. And same with Chelsea. I'd say I'd put this right up there with something like Abyss. And my 3 favorite tracks are going to be, I'll say, Crimson Stone, Blood Moon, and Viscera of Men. Least favorite track, definitely tough to pick here. Lowest rated song on this album's a 9. I'll say the weakest track here for me might be Diamond, just because it's the least dynamic song for me, but that's also where it has kind of a more bizarre strength of being, and it's more single-mindedness. But if I had to pick something, that's what it would be. It doesn't matter though, because I love it. And I give the album a 9.5 out of 10 as well. And God bless, what a good year for like atmospheric metal records. We get fucking Converge and Chelsea Wolfe. We get the new Wolves in the Throne Room being one of their best. We get the new fucking Panopticon. I mean, fuck, man.
Yes.
Oh, and the new Death Heaven. I mean,
yeah, I was gonna say Death Heaven. That's your baby.
I mean, in fairness, not really a metal record.
Same,
but
atmosphere though.
Yes,
you know what I mean.
The reverb.
It is what it is.
Okay, that is an average rating of 8.3 for Blood Moon 1. But let us know at home what you think of the new record from Converge and Chelsea Wolfe, Blood Moon, or what do you think of the new record from Adele, 30. Let us know what you think on either of these records or anything that we've discussed today in the comments below. Make sure you stick around for our record club on one of my favorite albums of all time, Yo La Tengo's I Can Hear the Heart Beating as One, which will be up on Tuesday. If you like what we do, if you want to support the channel, consider hitting the join button as well. For just $1, you can support us, and it makes a huge difference, and you get some perks of being a supporter in terms of being able to get priority comment replies, and we're going to be adding more perks as well. But yeah, if you like what we do and you want to throw us a buck, then we'd really appreciate it. Don't have to, but it's there. We will be back for another main episode of the podcast this time next week. It will be our last main episode of the year, actually. And then we'll be getting into our list videos after that, our end of year list videos, which we're very excited to prepare for you. But yeah, that's about it for this one. August.
As always, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Heineken, open your world.